Hello everyone, and thank you to the Voice of Africa for providing the platform and the stage for this important topic. As said, I'm James Wells, formerly an investment advisor at the Prosper Africa Initiative, a U.S. government initiative aimed at reimagining the trade and investment relationship between the U.S. and the continent of Africa. As noted while I was with Prosper Africa, one of the core things we tried to do is shift the narrative change. We've heard a lot about it. We know today's focused on the growth story and how we're framing that. And so we often shared the growth story statistics and projections that have been shared all throughout today. The fact that Africa will soon host half of the world's working age population, an increasingly digital economy, a continent burgeoning with new cities and increasingly urban populations, the wave of entrepreneurship, and I could go on and on. The IMF projections on 13 of the 20 largest, fastest growing economies in the world being in Africa for 2025. It's increasingly important with today's volatility at home in the US economy, and in other mainstream economies globally, that we start to really pay attention to Africa. That's where the growth is, that's where the opportunity is. And so today I want to speak a little bit about what we did and how in the Diaspora Connect room we can take advantage of this opportunity. So a large part of what we did at Prosper Africa was introduce mainstream investors to Africa as a way to not only diversify their portfolios with a market that often performs counter to mainstream markets, but as an opportunity to participate in Africa's growth story. In addition to providing de-risking products for investments, catalytic capital, and bespoke investor introductions, we provided the education component, aligning the actual risk with the perception of those investors. And so let's face it, it's daunting to introduce someone to Africa. It's 54 different countries, 54 different cultures. And so they need a guide. They need someone to show them where the opportunities are, where the key sectors are, which key countries to look at. And that's why Prosper Africa was such an incredible public good, because we did that for free. We introduced people to those sectors, sharing with them the high-performing sectors, being able to guide their hands, de-risk their transactions. But now's it's a different reality. And so the question now exists, who will fill that gap? Who's going to serve as that interlocutor with mainstream investors and Africa? This is where Africa's diaspora and the legacy families that exist on the continent today can fill the gap, but also take advantage of the massive business opportunities that exist. And so let's speak to the diaspora first. They're one of Africa's major comparative advantages. We've heard about the numbers of remittances, but it's beyond just remittances. It's the global network that is created through the diaspora. And so they bring that cross-cultural familiarity. They bridge that gap, introduce the investors to the continent that they're already familiar with. They already have the business connections on. And so this is increasingly important as government isolationist policies become more common across the globe, not only here, but abroad. And so over the years, I think the field of international development has been finding ways to decrease reliance on foreign aid. And so now, ripping the Band-Aid off, we get to see how well those recent years of programming have worked. Will things continue on their own? Admittedly, the negative is some things will fail. Some things were purely development and don't have that private lens, and it just won't continue. But on a positive note, the field was shifting towards private sector development anyways, including the work we were doing at Prosper Africa. And so now it's time for the private sector to take on and take over and ensure prosperity for Africa. And so now I've transitioned to a new role as the Director of Strategic Initiatives at 7 Generations Africa, a true family office development platform, a trusted advisor, private peer community, purpose-built for Africa's leading families to ensure that they preserve their wealth and grow their wealth on the continent for positive impacts across 7 generations and more, putting family first and Africa always within their portfolios. And so we often talk about Africa being able to leapfrog technological advances, jumping from 3G to 5G, skipping 4G entirely. But we never really talk about being able to take advantage of history and learn from the lessons that the US or Europe or others have made. And one thing that we know is that history shows that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by generation 2 and 90% by generation 3. If we can ensure that Africa maintains and holds on to the increasing wealth that they gain as all these unicorns come about, as Africa rises, then we can ensure that more wealth stays on the continent. And that's the goal that I have, that's the goal that 7GA has, and I look forward to connecting with you and sharing more about it. Thanks, man.